Chapter 8. Vivian and the other boys entered the south sitting room to the sound of children singing. The grand space, which had seemed so empty and underused on his arrival, was now teeming with young people, busy as a marketplace on Sunday morning and just as noisy. Vivian followed Token as the dark boy weaved a path through the clumps of conversing youngsters, while quietly supposing that, give or take a few stragglers, all of the residents of Murkwater must have gathered in this one place. The ages of the faces that momentarily separated themselves from the crowd as he passed varied on a wide scale. There were the very young, maybe 3 or 4, shuffling around in pairs or trios under the careful watch of older kids. Then there were those around 9 or 10 years old, a little less wide-eyed and a lot more wary. Just as many were those of around Vivian's age or a little bit older. Every one of them, regardless of age, was filthy, tired-looking, and had an apathetic glaze to their eyes usually reserved for farm animals. Vivian recognized that these were not like the kids that he had rolled with in the old neighborhood, who had hard outer shells but soft, gooey middle-class centers. These were true urchins, hard-boiled and toughened like leather. Token nodded to several other boys, other leaders, Vivian supposed, who nodded back before returning their attention to their groups. Vivian saw King residing over a makeshift stall in one of the corners of the room and realized that he too must be the leader of a group. The self-proclaimed monarch languished in a cushy armchair, his rain-soaked crown drooping a little over his rock-star hair as he watched a gaggle of younger kids inspect his wares. The stall itself, a blanket spread out over the carpet and littered with various items, was guarded by several rough-looking boys, some almost in their teens. King spotted Token and stood, pointing the dark boy out to his impressionable customers. Token ignored the attention and pushed on, eager it seemed to trace the source of the singing that was growing steadily nearer. Breaking through into a clearing of sorts, Vivian saw a circle of youngsters following each other in what appeared to be a strange musical game that he had never seen before. Round and round they skipped, singing what sounded like a nursery rhyme. Where, oh where is Forest Green? Forest Green cannot be seen. Is he lying cold and curled? Is he in the nether world? Check your closet, check your bed. Pray he's only in your head. Where, oh where is Forest Green? Waiting, watching, cruel and mean. Behind the circle of children, on the wood-panelled wall above the fireplace, Vivian saw an image that had been spray-painted in red paint. It was a stencil rather than freehand, and depicted a skinny, twisted troll-like figure with long wild hair, clawing hands, and small fangs. "Ah, shit," Lewis groaned. "Another one?" "Fresh, too," Tank said, barely looking at the stencil. "That wasn't here when we came downstairs." Vivian frowned at the unsettling image. "You guys have seen that before?" "You could say that," Token nodded, his eyes following the circle of skipping figures. Vivian followed his gaze, then looked from the kids to the stencil and back, making the connection. "You think one of them did it?" "If they did," Lewis growled, "I hope they catch the little bastard. I'm getting tired of doing pots and pans." After a second round of verses, the circle of kids stopped skipping and stood in place. Those in the audience who'd been singing along held the final note while the players caught their breath and turned to face inward. Mean. Then the pace and rhythm of the song changed, and with it the game itself. It became more urgent, frantic, and to Vivian, more sinister. Cover your eyes so we cannot see, cover your ears so we cannot hear, cover your mouth so we cannot speak, cover your hands so we cannot feel. As Vivian watched the new style of play, he quickly picked up the rules. Each verse appeared to require an accompanying movement which had to be performed by the players almost instantly. Hands over the eyes to inhibit sight, over the ears to block hearing, over the mouth to block speech, or behind the back hiding them entirely. One lone child, a dark-skinned girl with flying pigtails and sporting a pair of pink bunny ears, continued to skip around the rest of the circle. When one of the players could not match the correct action with the verse fast enough, they were seized by the black girl and would fall to the floor with a cry, as if struck dead. The audience of voices, prompted by one whisperer, changed up the pattern of verses at random, sometimes doubling them up, sometimes tripling them up. Vivian watched on, fascinated, feeling the rising tension, the fatigue of the players, the mounting dread as one by one the players fell. Eventually, only one survivor remained, and still the game continued. Vivian gave a nervous chuckle as he realized that, like the classic electronic game of Tetris, or the older Ring Around the Rosie, there was no actual winner to the game. Everyone eventually lost. The changes got faster and faster and faster, and the sole survivor struggled to keep up. The skipping girl, tiny but menacing in her role, circled him relentlessly like a shark. Finally, the survivor made a blunder, and, with a scream of triumph, the girl sprang upon him and dragged them both down to the floor. There was much laughing and clapping from the audience, with particular praise going out to the last kid standing, a shy-looking boy with an old pair of headphones hanging around his neck. Vivian saw an elfin-looking girl with pale skin, a sprinkle of freckles, and blonde hair slicked back into trusses go up to the owner of the headphones. Whispering something in his ear, she slid a rubber band onto his wrist. He blushed and looked down at it proudly like it was a gold medal. Vivian was about to ask Token what the band meant when the girl spotted him and hurried over. Hey, new kid, she called. It's Vivian, he called back. Hey is for horses. Okay, Vivian. Hey, can I call you V for short? She gave him a winning smile. Call him Cobweb, Token called over his shoulder. We do. He'd stopped beside the kid with the headphones and gave his hair a congratulatory ruffle. Cobweb then, the girl hurried on. Nice hair, by the way. So, are you interested in buying a gingerbread man? For protection, right? Vivian gave her an incredulous look. Are you serious? Only fresh ones work, she urged. Don't let that creep king sell you a used one. Me and Lewis, we make them fresh every week. Lewis? Vivian blinked. You mean our Lewis? He glanced over at the Latin boy who was deep in conversation with another group. You mean he was serious about baking? He stifled a laugh and then grimaced as fresh pain bloomed through his swollen jaw. The girl continued her sales pitch unperturbed. It's easy. Take one lock of that sweet white hair of yours, poke it through the third eye of your gingerbread man, and you are set. She beamed as if she just handed him the keys to a new car. Good quality PM. Nasty old Forrest can't tell the difference. What an imagination you have, Amber, Kim purred as he inserted himself between them. Unfortunately for you, our new friend knows quality PM when he sees it. He clicked his fingers and two of his gang appeared. One boy in a baseball cap muscled Amber out of the way, while another, surly lad in a fisherman's beanie, handed King a sealable sandwich bag over his shoulder. No fair, King, Amber cried, hopping to be seen over the shoulders of the boy. First claim rights. Exactly. King waved her away. And you're too late. The new kid is already a loyal customer of mine. He held up the bag so Vivian could see the contents as a small, greyish bone wrapped in rough brown twine and tied into a necklace. King then made a show of handing Vivian the bag and said in a loud voice, Forrest's favour. Compliments of the Merchant King. Feeling awkward as many eyes looked his way, Vivian muttered his thanks and snatched the bag, stuffing it into the pocket of his Levi's. Satisfied that enough people had taken notice, King patted Vivian on the shoulder and swept over to Token, where he performed the same song and dance. Vivian watched with great satisfaction as the dark boy removed the bone necklace from his bag and sniffed at it, earning an embarrassed bluster from King about quality and trust. Smiling despite the risk of reopening his lip, Vivian returned his attention to Amber, who looked crestfallen. A ripple of guilt ran through him as he realized that he had inadvertently shut her down in front of everybody by accepting King's gift. You wear it around your neck, she said, pointing toward his pocket with a sad smile. I can help you put it on. I don't want his stupid necklace, Vivian said, pulling out the bag. He looked at the bone through the plastic distastefully. And I don't need its protection. He held it out to Amber. You take it. Trade it with someone else. She shook her head. It'll lose its power. Forest favour doesn't carry over. Forest favour? Vivian said, brushing aside a kid carrying a glass jar filled with cockroaches. I keep hearing that. What is it? Amber seemed to be about to explain when the high-pitched squeal of an excited child sliced the air. The tiny pigtail girl with the bunny ears that Vivian had been watching before butted past him and scurried into Token's waiting arms. The dark boy laughed, his frown almost completely disappearing as she covered his face in kisses. Vivian felt the envious warmth of an only child witnessing the love between siblings, a relationship he himself had never experienced. Amber was talking again, but Vivian found himself paying attention instead to how Token and the girl spoke to each other, how she had trouble meeting his eyes sometimes, how her bunny ears flopped back and forth as she nodded in that exaggerated way that all small children do. Then Token pointed to Vivian, the little girl looked at him, and he knew it was his cue to enter their happy world. You better go over and say hi, Amber said good-naturedly. All trace of her earlier disappointment had gone. After all, she said, the fastest way to Token's heart is through his sister. Vivian felt his face flush with embarrassment. Oh yeah? What does that mean? Oh please. She rolled her eyes and gave him a shove. Someone called Danielle Steele. You both stink of bromance. Danielle who? Just go, Bromeo. Whatever. Vivian shook his head as he walked toward Token. He had already decided that he liked Amber and still felt bad about causing her embarrassment even if he didn't mean to. He raised his voice so it would be overheard. "I'll let you know when I'm ready to trade, okay?" Her freckled smile was radiant. "You better." Then, unable to help herself, she added, "I've got lucky bands too. And crow's feathers. Fine PM. Come find me." "Give it a rest, Amber," Token shouted at her. "Don't be scaring him off now." Vivian laughed and wiped imaginary sweat off his forehead. "Thanks, man. This place is Times Square." "Vivian Fox," Token said proudly, slapping him on the shoulder. "Meet Cyan, my baby sister." Vivian smiled and nodded at the girl, who shyly turned away and buried her face in Token's chest. "Must be that fat lip of yours," Token laughed. "That or you're just ugly all the time." Vivian was about to return the compliment when, with a barely audible click of the latch, a ripple of whispering swept through the sitting room, and Vivian saw all faces were turning toward him, looking at him. No, he realized, not at him. "Getting into trouble already, deviant?" he heard Mr. Gorgon's voice break the hush. "Just meeting the local wildlife Gorgon," he turned, giving the Dean of Murkwater a smile so wide that his lip indeed did reopen, leaking warmth down his chin. This retort earned him a few gasps and snickers from the crowd. "Yes, I heard." Gorgon stared down at Vivian with his owl-like eyes. "You'll have to be more careful next time. Mr. Mallory is quite protective of his flock." Hands clasped behind his back, the Dean moved past Vivian toward the stencil above the fireplace. Any children that were in his path quickly fell back to give him room, as if they believed the man could kill them with a look. Stopping before the image, the Dean dropped his shoulders with a sigh and shook his head. Vivian looked over to Token, who had moved Cyan behind him. "It seems our young vandal has been up to their tricks again," Mr. Gorgon said in a loud voice. "And I suppose once again there were no witnesses to see who did it?" He glanced around, staring at several faces before shaking his head and saying in a low voice, "No, of course not." Reaching up with the cuff of his jacket, he began to rub the figure's face into the polished surface of the wood paneling, smudging the wet paint back and forth until it was unrecognizable. He performed this act with the vehemence and savagery of a man whipping a horse, his strokes getting larger and faster, smudging and smearing the image more and more until he suddenly broke off with a final swipe. "Haven't I told you all before," he spun and took in the whole room, his voice louder and angrier, "that these representations are unacceptable? Didn't I explain that superstition and folklore has no place here?" His eyes darted to individual children who looked down at their shoes. "Mr. Morris! Mr. Morris, where are you?" "Here, Dean," Vivian heard King's frightened rasp somewhere behind him. Mr. Gorgon focused on the voice, eyes widening like those of a cat about to pounce. "Step forward, boy." There was a shuffling noise, and King appeared on the other side of the crowd, minus his crown. Miserably, he took a step further into the no-man's land between the line of children and the waiting Dean. Mr. Gorgon's left eye twitched a little. "I don't suppose you've been exacerbating the problem, have you? Remember, I did warn you about selling those ghastly trinkets of yours." King shot Vivian a desperate look. "No, sir, I haven't. None of that PM, as you children put it? No cat's eyes, no crow's feet, snake skins, perhaps?" Vivian slipped the sandwich bag back into his pocket as carefully as he could and prayed that the crinkling plastic wasn't going to give him away. "No, sir." King withered under the Dean's gaze. The Dean's face snapped to the left. "And what about you, Miss Turner?" he growled. "Our resident chef has mentioned on several occasions that she has returned for the morning shift to the distinct smell of nutmeg filling the kitchen. I hope for your sake that you haven't been whipping up batches of gingerbread men on the sly." "No, sir," came a soft reply from the crowd. "Step forward, I can't see you." The Dean seemed to gloat a little. "An honest countenance is a confident one." Amber ambled out of the crowd looking very lost. "I said no, sir," she repeated. "Because you told me." "Because I told you that sort of thing sends the wrong message," the Dean finished for her. "I'm glad you remember. Now, Mr. Morris, Miss Turner, you are going to help me spread the right message, aren't you?" "Yes." Amber nodded. "I guess," King mumbled. "I think the answer you are looking for, Mr. Morris, is yes." King's lower lip trembled a little. "Yes. Good," the Dean said. "I think an adequate message would be to go to the broom closet, collect the necessary cleaning equipment, and get to work removing this disruption. If you and your friends start right now, you might finish before the end of lunch. That way you won't disrupt the afternoon classes." Amber nodded, grateful to escape, and exited through the doors. King hung his head in apparent defeat, but Vivian saw his lips moving in silent curses. Without looking up, he stalked off after Amber. Mr. Gorgon wasn't done, however. He glared at Vivian now. Mr. Fox, whatever credit you believe you are entitled to being the newcomer to Murkwater, consider it now dissolved. From now on, you will fit the mold, or we will make you fit. In response to your lack of respect to Mr. Mallory this afternoon, I designate the task of pots and pans to you and your cohorts every day for a week, starting from tonight's meal. Ah, shit, muttered Lewis. Remember, the Dean continued, now addressing the entire room, vandalism is not tolerated here at Murkwater, and rest assured, I will see those responsible a court and punished accordingly. But in the meantime, he threw a finger at the smudged image. No more singing, no more games, no more nonsense. There is no forest green. He practically spat the words. There never was.